So once again, good morning, everyone. So I was surprised when I was praying this week and asking God, what's the message that you want to give to everybody at church this Sunday? And very clearly, the topic of sweet surrender came up. And I had to pray about it and really understand why is it that God was asking me to share on this topic. And as I was meditating and praying, what I realized is that surrendering to God has been one of the most powerful experiences of my life. Thank you. Honestly, the moments where my relationship with God went to a different level, a different dimension, is when I could make that courageous act to really, truly, 100% surrender to God, God's love, God's plan, God's vision for me. But I have to say, it's also the hardest. It's not an easy thing. It's really a challenging thing to truly surrender to God. In fact, actually, when you think of the word surrender, what comes to mind when you hear the word surrender? Pain, losing. What else? Defeat. Giving up. What else? Sacrifice. Freedom. From the spiritual point of view. But a lot of times when we think of surrender, we're thinking of surrendering to an enemy or an opponent. You know, we're giving in, we're giving up, we're losing something. But if you think about surrender, you know, in that context, is it a loving parent or an enemy that we're talking about? In the spiritual context, we're talking about a loving parent. We're not talking about an enemy. We're not talking about someone who wants to take something from us or hurt us or harm us in any way or cause us to give up something that we care about or banish us from some place. When we're talking about surrendering to God, we're talking about an absolutely 100% unconditionally loving force. Our Heavenly Parent only wants the absolute best for us. Our Heavenly Parent looks at us, and no matter what situation we're in, always sees the possibility for good. Every time, in every situation, God sees the possibility and the potential for good and is seeking to shower us with more love than we ever experienced before and bring us into new experiences unlike what we've been able to experience before. Greater depths of joy, greater experiences of laughter, of peace, of comfort, of excitement. The issue is that we have a limited perspective. There's only so much that we can see and so much that we can understand from our point of view, from where we are. So sometimes what God may be trying to tell us or what God might be trying to lead us toward, from our perspective, doesn't seem like it's going to make us happy. It doesn't necessarily seem like it's going to be fun or it's going to bring more love or more joy or more abundance or more blessing into our life. And yet, God is calling us to it, or God may be asking us to take some kind of action. And it can be hard to really trust, even though we know God is omnipresent. We know God is omniscient. We know God is absolutely loving. Still, we can't always see or we can't always feel that what it is that God is asking us to do or leading us towards or challenging us about is going to bring this goodness. It's going to bring this joy, this fulfillment. Our true Father is expressing to us that, and also Jesus is expressing to us that God wants to give us 100%. 100% of his love, 100% of his joy, 100% of his peace. We are the ones that limit that, not God. Not God. God wants to give everything. God wants to pour out everything. But our ideas, our concepts, our thinking is what gets in the way of that really being able to pour out. For me, I had one of the most profound experiences with surrendering to God around April of last year. If you remember what happened in April, we had the event with True Mother in Los Angeles at the City of Refuge Church. Do you remember that? That was one of the first times since our True Mother became the central pillar of our movement from the time of our True Father's passing, where she really stood representing both True Father and True Mother, that a mega Christian church welcomed her into their church to speak to thousands of their members and people from all over the country and all over the world. It was quite a powerful moment for our True Mother, and it shifted something in America in terms of what we could do. And also at that time, a blessing ceremony was held. Well, for me, I had been mentioning to some of our leadership that I thought it was really important to have a blessing ceremony at these events where our True Mother speaks, and we're bringing together people from, all over, and they're going to be hearing our True Mother. I felt, yeah, we should give the blessing. We should allow them to receive the blessing. And for many different reasons, it wasn't possible at Madison Square Garden, and it wasn't possible in other settings. But this time, going into this event in Los Angeles, Reverend Dunkley, our president, came to me and he said, we're going to do a blessing. And I was really excited and inspired about that. And then the next thing came. Can you lead that blessing? Can you MC that blessing? Do you think I was excited? No. Of course, I was inspired about the idea of someone giving the blessing. What a great idea for somebody else to give that blessing at that program. But all of a sudden, God, through Reverend Dunkley, was asking me to be the one to lead that blessing ceremony. And that was a totally different story. Me? You want me to do it? And of course, immediately, all these things started running through my head. Oh, I'm not qualified. There's a lot of other people that are much better public speakers, that have a lot more experience giving the blessing. I just started running off a list in my head of all the different ways that I wasn't the right person. This wasn't the right thing. I don't think I'm supposed to do this, and I offered many other suggestions for other people. But it was pretty clear, and Reverend Dunkley was pretty clear, you're going to lead this blessing. You're going to MC this blessing. So I faced this moment of having God really clearly asking me to step up and to make an offering and to go beyond what I think is possible and to be a part of something bigger than myself. But I have to tell you, I was resisting with every fiber of my being. And it wasn't like I said no one time. I said no over and over again. And yet somehow I kept being in charge of this blessing. And I was kind of, many times I'd pray, God, isn't there somebody else? And I kept looking, kept hoping, okay, I'll show up at the meeting, but maybe I'll find somebody else who can lead this blessing ceremony. It's got to be, someone who can take responsibility for it. But at the same time, I could feel that God was calling me. So I had to make I had to try to warm myself up to it. And so I made sure I did show up to meetings, and I made sure I got the ticket to go to Los Angeles. And I prayed and I read the scriptures to try to equip myself. But even up until the last day, the day before, I was going to stand up there and do this emceeing. I was struggling, overcome by this feeling of being, God, am I the one? Paralyzed by fear. How am I going to do this? And at some point, it occurred to me, and I remember this feeling so clearly of just, God, I surrender. I surrender. And I realized, because God, you are here. You are with me. You've asked me to do this. You believe that I can do it. You're going to work through me. It's not me. Actually, that was what really allowed me to finally surrender. It's not me. Yes, physically, I'm going to stand up there on that stage. Physically, I'm going to be the one that's speaking and leading everybody through the actions of the blessing. But actually, it's going to be you. It's going to be your heart that touches people. It's going to be your spirit. And even the words that I say, you're going to be the one that gives me those words. And this resistance that was taking up so much of my energy, I felt almost sick. I was so scared. I was so overwhelmed by the by the thought of what I was being called to do. But as I finally let go and released myself to God, this peacefulness washed over me. This calm washed over me, that I'm in God's hands, and God is going to do this. And then the next day, I got up there in front of thousands of people, and in the front rows were the politicians and the leaders of all the different faiths. And I learned that True Mother was watching in the next room as I was conducting this blessing ceremony. And I got up there and I felt this energy from God. I felt this Spirit of God that I had never experienced before coming into me. And this power came to me to be able to speak in such a way that I had never imagined I could do. Had you asked me even 3 days before, I wouldn't have been able to conceive of it. But out it came. And the declarations and testifying to our true parents and being able to share the blessing, out it came. And that day, thousands of people received the blessing that hadn't received it before. And I had to give glory and honor to God. And there was the relief that came before, and after it was done, I almost collapsed on the floor. I got off the stage, and literally there was a green room, and I just flopped into the chair, just amazed. Yeah, that just happened. I just did that. And I knew that it was God, and I felt God. I felt God, and I realized that by totally surrendering to God, God showed up. And God did something that I couldn't have imagined. And that one act, and I was just one part of the whole program, which was so powerful. And then our True Mother came to the stage, and she was so well received. And that initiated a whole new wave of Christianity. Being able to respond and to hear the words of true parents and know our true mother and true father in a different way. Up until what we just saw a few months ago at the Prudential Center, where we launched the World Clergy Leadership Conference. And True Mother said, from that point, from being able to declare the World Clergy Leadership Conference, she could open up and really substantially declare Chanoguk on that foundation of the World Clergy Leadership Conference and launch this course of 2027 to substantially restore even more nations to God. So when I think back to it, I realize we don't know. We can't imagine the one part that God's asking us to do. That one part might seem small or might be a small part, but it can really be tremendous to us. Right now, our true parents are calling us to challenge ourselves. They're calling us to do things that many of us don't feel we're capable of. Or it's too much, it's overwhelming. Or we have relationships in our lives that challenge us to stretch and go beyond what we think we can do. Or positions to take, or service, ways we're being called to serve. And only God truly knows the impact that will be made for you personally and for others by you stepping up and doing that thing. But I can tell you that after that experience, it's become easier and easier to surrender to God when the challenges come, when the calls come. Because of the sweetness, the joy that I felt, the joy that I experienced, the oneness with God that came through that moment. And then to see the impact that it could make for me and for other people. But I can't emphasize enough how much I was resisting. So I can speak really wonderfully about it now. I can speak really joyfully about it now. But the resistance was so strong in me before that moment came. When I think about how much we resist what God is asking us to do, I can't help but think about my 3-year-old when he has a tantrum. So I don't know if you've had any 3-year-olds around you lately that you've been able to witness having a tantrum, but it's a full body experience, okay? When you tell your child that it's time to put their pajamas on, and in their mind, it is not time to put pajamas on, it is time to keep playing, their whole body resists. No! And the arms are flailing, and the legs are kicking, and every ounce of their energy is going into resisting what you're asking them to do, because in their mind, it's going to be torture. Torture. And you have to negotiate, and you have to cajole, and finally, somehow, usually it goes, we'll read your favorite story. We'll read 3 of your favorite stories. It's going to be great. And then finally, this little child decides, okay, maybe mommy knows something. I'll put on my pajamas. And then, there's like this moment where there was arms and legs flailing, and you had to, dodge the legs that were coming towards you. All of a sudden, this little child just goes limp. Okay, mommy. Okay, mommy. And then I have to, maneuver the arm to put it into the sleeve because he's so resigned and he's so happy. And the pajamas go on and he's reading a story. And then it was all that sadness, all that anger, all that frustration. It's like it didn't exist. Wow, pajamas are great. Stories are great. I'm so happy now. We tend to be kind of like that. if we're honest with ourselves, certain of what God is asking us to, many of what God asks us to do is not necessarily, and maybe blatantly sometimes, against what we think we should do, or want to do, or feel like doing, or think is going to be good for us. And we resist. We may not have the all-out tantrum, but we might, sometimes, in the quiet of our own prayer room or something. Let God know how we feel about it. But we do resist, and we put a lot of energy into that. And we can be, like I was telling you, you're thinking your way out of it. You're coming up with excuses. So much energy is going into it. And then, finally, if we let ourselves believe that our parent knows best, that God knows best, that God has something good in mind for us, and we give it, we surrender. We surrender to God. We experience what my 3-year-old experiences. This peace, this comfort washes over us. Because all that energy that was going into resisting, you don't have to use that energy anymore. And if you think of God as a mighty wave, God is a mighty force of love. God is a mighty force of truth. That's a lot of energy coming to us. And if we're pushing ourselves against God, if we're refusing to listen to what God has to say, if we're pushing God away, and we're small human beings when you think about the omnipotent God, it's a lot of energy we're wasting. And if we don't have to do that anymore, if we can trust that God has something good for us in mind, if we can receive that love, if we can go with God's plan, instead of that wave coming against us, and maybe you've experienced this, going to the beach. If you stand in front of a wave and that wave hits you, it hurts. It's going to knock you down. You're going to have a bruise if you stand right in that wave. But what happens if instead you leap with the wave and you go into the wave? Then that wave carries you. You feel almost light and free. You feel this freedom that comes. And God's plans for our life are like that. God's desire for us is like that. We can be knocked over, we can be knocked out, or we can go with the flow of what God is calling us to do. What I want to invite everyone to do is, maybe not today, maybe it's in the next few days, maybe it's in the next week, but I know all of us are going to have a moment where God is going to challenge us on something, or God is going to call us to something. And it could even be right now. And when that moment comes, I want to encourage you to surrender and experience the sweetness and experience what comes after and what all of the impact of that surrender might do for you. And it's okay if you have to struggle with it, and it's okay if you have to resist, but see if you can get to that place where you can really let go and surrender to God. Thank you.
$100%, come on. 100%.